This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken start today's show with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode discussing food and hunting plots for deer. K-State's Reid and Ashlee Westerhold continue with the show highlighting and previewing the Kansas Landowner Conference and what attendees could learn. Mike Brouk, K-State dairy specialist, ends the show explaining the move away from brown midrib hybrid corn varieties and how that will impact seed offerings for 2026. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our show with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode from K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken.
We're going to talk about some food plots today, Drew, for deer, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so, it's early October. It's a little late in a lot of people's mind to be thinking about food plots, but it's actually not too late to be thinking about hunting plots, especially for white-tailed deer in the Central Great Plains, and especially if you're not necessarily an early-season archery hunter. It's a couple of weeks you can have plenty of food out there if you've got good soil moisture and it hadn't gotten too cold yet. So, yeah, I wanted to discuss, especially thinking about food plots as hunting plots, because that's really the main purpose of a food plot for white-tailed deer in the Great Plains when we think about it. So,
is there a difference? Does it matter, or is it just what we're calling them?
Well, it doesn't matter. It's just what we're calling them. But from when we look at the research around providing food for wildlife, and especially providing food for white-tailed deer, a lot of the research that supports food plantings for deer from a carrying capacity standpoint, or from an increasing carrying capacity standpoint, it comes from South Texas or the southeastern United States. And a lot of times we talk about wildlife in general, right? We think about, well, a deer's a deer, wherever it is, and something that's good for deer in Mississippi, well, it's going to be good for deer in Kansas too, right? But that's not always the case. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit. We spend a lot of time focusing on managing natural habitat rather than plantings, at least on this podcast. And so we haven't really done an episode on food plots for deer, and I wanted to talk about that.
Well, what the food plots themselves, or hunting plots, whatever term we end up with, when I'm thinking about planting them, normally I'm way too late. It's kind of here's hunting season already and I want to throw something out. And so then I'm viewing it kind of as, maybe we've had a frost and I feel like I'm just kind of putting some candy out there and attracting, deer to something that they're excited to eat. And so is that what I'm doing if I'm throwing out some peas or beets or something? And then the other way I think about it is, earlier in the season, maybe I can put out some stuff, and I'm probably wrong here, but I'm going to supplement them. They're going to go eat this stuff, and they're going to grow really big antlers because they have all of the right nutrition they need. Or I put out a mineral block, and now they can, go do, which I don't put out mineral blocks anymore, thanks to you. But when I used to, I was thinking, I'm doing all these little things to get the perfect hunting opportunity and help out the deer. Now I'm wondering if I'm just wasting my time, just go climbing that deer stand a little more often.
Right.
That was a lot of information. I don't know if I have a question, but those are some of my thoughts about why I put out plants. Plus, it's just fun to see green when everything else is dead after that frost.
Yeah. Well, so let's think about all the different things that you said, and so when you're thinking about the effects on antler size and all those sorts of things, really what we need to think about there is, do we see signs in our deer population in an area of food limitation? And typically the things that we would see that would be signs of food limitation would be stuff like winter kill. Do we have massive die-offs when it gets really cold and food becomes limiting? We don't see that in the Central Great Plains at all. Fawn survival, do we see low fawn survival? Fawn survival tends to not be related back to milk production or those sorts of things, available food for fawns that have weaned. It tends to be more associated with cover being limited where we are. Twinning rates, as long as we have some decent rainfall, we see lots and lots of twins. We see triplets sometimes and those sorts of things. And that's independent of anything that somebody's planting. Do we see poor adult body condition and those sorts of things? Well, I don't know how many deer you've harvested during January, but those, that time of year in Kansas and most of the Central Great Plains, we're going to be harvesting does, right? And those does have been pregnant for a couple of months, or at least a month and a half probably during that January time period. And I regularly harvest does that have an inch of fat on their rump, right?
It's crazy.
I don't know that except in very specific situations, I'm not seeing lots of skinny deer out there in this part of the country. When we did our deer research project out in western Kansas, we were catching them in February, March, that time frame, and they're still very, very fat, very healthy deer. So those are signs that point towards we don't have a food limitation issue for the most part. Something else that you could look at on a property, do we see browse lines and those sorts of things?
I like to plant peas because I'm lazy, so I'm just scatter out some peas and watch them grow. And I watch deer walk along, and they hammer them. They like to eat them.
Sure.
So if they have enough food, why are they eating the peas that I throw out there?
Purpose of that food plot in this part of the country is to get a critter in front of somebody at a specific time, right? And it's to make the movements of that critter more predictable. And let's just think about K-State's campus. If you wanted to have a high probability of encountering folks, there's some different places that you could go. And one of those places, I use this example in my habitat management class, and it might be kind of a goofy example, but we have folks who want to encounter lots of people to hand out pamphlets or hand out other things. And those folks gather in certain areas. One of those places is crosswalks, right? Another place is by the student union. And other places might be where a public transportation bus stops. Okay, if we're thinking about deer or translating those kinds of things back to wildlife, a crosswalk represents a bottleneck, right? So that would be a place on the landscape where critters have to go, or critters might make the choice to go to make their movements more easy. An example of a bottleneck out on the landscape might be a small patch of trees in the middle of, let's say we've got a small patch of trees that's providing cover that is in between a bedding and a feeding area. Okay, so that's your crosswalk. That's your bottleneck. The drop-off point for public transportation would be the same sort of thing. What's the student union represent?
Well, that's food, I would guess.
Yeah, that's food. It's also a gathering place, but there's lots and lots of eating places there. So having that food in a specific location makes it more likely that you're going to encounter that critter. So that's an important piece of it. Why are they eating it if they've got enough food? That goes back to providing something that they might like because of either the nutritional characteristics that it has, the protein content, the phosphorus content, the energy content, all those different things. So that's one reason they might eat it. It also might be that it is a kind of food that tends to be limited at a given time of the year. So you're talking about peas. Well, in our area, if you scatter out Austrian winter peas during the fall and they start to grow, that is a legume that I like to eat myself. I like to go out and when I plant Austrian winter peas, I'll go out there and pick some and eat them just like greens or a salad, right? Because they're sweet. They've got a lot of energy in them. They've also got a lot of protein. They're highly digestible. They're tasty. They're palatable. all those sorts of things. And during that fall hunting season time, many of our forbs, including lots of our native legumes, have senesced, or they've stopped growing, they've turned brown. Their nutritional quality has drastically declined. Their digestibility has declined. They've become tough and all those sorts of things. So if you can provide something that's tasty and nutritious and easy to digest that is not necessarily available, even though protein may not be limited at that time of the year, then they're going to eat it. So Call Hall. It's closed right now, so we can't go there right now at K-State campus. But that's where our ice cream is produced, right? And so when we think about those food plot plants and why are the deer selecting them? Well, they're selecting them for the same reason that you might select a Call Hall ice cream cone, right? It's tasty. It's got a lot of energy in it. It produces signals in your body that say, this is good.
Yeah.
And it's good because it's sweet. It's good for lots of different reasons. But you're probably not ice cream limited, are you?
My kids might be, but I don't think that I am.
Yeah. And I think the point I'm trying to make there is just because an animal eats something and just because they select something when it's available doesn't necessarily mean that they're limited.
Yeah, we don't need to have the ice cream, but if it's in front of me, I'm going to eat it kind of deal.
Sure.
That makes sense.
Once again, that was Joe Gerken and Drew Ricketts with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode. If you'd like to listen to the rest of this episode, you can search for Fins, Fur, and Feathers on your favorite podcast streaming platform or follow the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing the Kansas Landowners Conference with K-State Extension farm economist Robin Reid and Director of the Office of Farm and Ranch Transition at K-State, Ashlee Westerhold. Robin, Ashlee, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Thank you.
Robin, the Kansas Landowners Conference, this being the third year for it to take place, and what is this conference and why do you guys put it on?
Yeah, so this conference has been, as you said, successful for the last 2 years, and we've been really excited to bring it back for a third year. This is something that was a new initiative to really reach the landowner demographic of Kansas. And I, as an economist, have done quite a bit of research on who our landowners are in Kansas, and that's been changing over time. If you think about as a farm transitions, a lot of times the heirs may continue to own that farm ground, but they don't farm it themselves anymore. They might be living in Kansas City or Wichita or not even in Kansas, but continue to rent that land and have it in the family. So when I've been going through research, typically the numbers that I think about 50% of our farm and our pasture ground in Kansas is operated with a lease. So if you think about that, that is a huge amount of acreage and huge contributor to our economy to have that ground available for grazing cattle and for farming. So with that, you also think about, okay, if the landowner isn't farming it themselves, where are they? And I really, a few years ago, did a lot of deep dive into, even at the county level, where our landowners are located. And back then, a few years ago, about 15% of our land was owned by landowners outside of the state of Kansas. Well, that doesn't seem like a huge amount. That is still over 8 million of our crop and pasture acres are owned by people not in the state of Kansas. And I think this trend is just going to continue as we've had more transition in the farm and ranch industry, that we have more landowners that are less connected to agriculture, maybe didn't even grow up on the farm or ranch, but still have ownership of it. And so this conference is really designed to help those landowners get up to speed, know what's going on in the ag economy, how to work on lease agreements and negotiation, and just really everything a landowner might want to know when it comes to owning farm ground or pasture in Kansas and leasing that out.
So within the schedule, what are a few key topics they really think help the landowners or the attendees of this conference get up to speed with agriculture?
Focus this year is really going to just be on what is going on and how is agriculture being affected. Obviously the tariff situation, the China not having the trade deal in place that's affecting our soybean market, grain, sorghum, trickling down to corn and wheat. So where our commodity prices are really at a historically low level right now. So what we want to emphasize is, why is that happening? How long might this go on for? How does that affect the lease agreement? On the flip side of that, we have a huge beef cattle industry here in the state of Kansas. And if you've watched beef cattle prices, they have been historically high. So what's contributing to that, and how does that affect the lease agreement? So we're really going to go through those ag economy aspects as our keynote speakers on this conference. But then the beauty of this conference is we break out into 4 different breakout session rooms both days of the conference, so that a landowner can decide what topics then they want to go to and hear in-depth information on. So some of those are the same that we've had in the past, such as wind and solar leases, government programs, grain marketing, land easements, some of those. But we also have a host of new topics this year too. One of them that I'm going to be doing is talking about flexible lease arrangements for your farm, just that can move with the commodity prices the way that we have today. Some of the other new ones, we have a full session just on pasture leases this year. And then some ones that are new. Kansas Forest Service is going to be there talking about riparian areas on leased land and some of the programs that they offer. So you really just need to go on the website and dive into all the different things that are available, because there's just a wealth of topics on this year's schedule.
So is this for landowners who own crop ground, pastures, but maybe also own ground specific for hunting?
Yes, really all of the above. And that the hunting that you mentioned is also becoming a huge industry here in Kansas. We're looking at land values. We know that the hunting or recreational aspect of farm or pasture contributes a lot to its value. But I think also knowing about what the farming side of that is and what opportunities exist in both aspects is important. So yeah, really all of the above. If you own land here in Kansas, even if you're a retired operator and are going to become a landowner and someone renting your ground, this is also a conference for you.
Ashlee, as you are with the Office of Farm and Ranch Transition, do you see this even for the perspective of landowners who are transitioning land, maybe the older generation and the younger generation coming?
Yeah, so in this conference, we actually have estate planning topics and we have succession planning topics that are within the schedule, depending on, again, which breakout you choose. But our last keynote speaker is actually Roger McCowan, who is an ag law professor at Washburn University, and he will be talking about some tax implications that came with ABBA, or the One Big Beautiful Bill. So he will be discussing tax policy updates, which include some estate planning updates as well with that new act in place. Another thing is that we are encouraging operators who might have children who might become these landowners who are non-operating to send them to this conference. If you know that you will have children who are non-operating and are going to be landowners one day, this is a perfect conference to try to get them up to speed on what a lot of the terms that are used, so they get information early and are able to become well-informed landowners. What I think is very interesting about our past 2 years of these conferences is that a lot of our landowners really liked learning from each other. So not just learning from our AgEcon faculty here at Kansas State, but actually hearing from experiences from landowners who have been non-operating landowners for 50 plus years, potentially, some of them. And so we actually have intentionally put in discussion sessions to this conference that we haven't had in the previous years that really target this camaraderie and networking aspect for these landowners. And so I would say that's what I am most excited about this year is our added emphasis on this networking and peer-to-peer learning. So those peer-to-peer learning discussion topic areas are broken out between negotiation topics. So last year we had negotiating a lease, and the best part of that topic or that session was actually everyone learning ways to negotiate a lease within that room. Another discussion topic that we have picked is land as an investment. Do we have investors in Kansas land? How are they working? How do they find that as an investment? Land conservation practices. So we have a lot of non-operating landowners who are so interested in conservation. How can I make sure conservation practices are happening on my farm as a non-operator? And then women landowners. And so as we have operated in Women in Ag series, we understand that women love to learn from other women and they feel more comfortable in a woman's space. And so those are our 4 discussion area topics where, again, it is peer-to-peer learning. It is discussion-led sessions. And I think that is one of the most interesting parts of our 3rd landowner conference that we are having.
This Kansas Landowner Conference taking place November 11th and 12th in Manhattan, Kansas. And do people need to get registered, or how does that work for this conference?
Yeah, the easiest way to get registered is go on our website, AgManager.info/landowner, and that'll have all the conference information we talked about and the registration link. We do need people to register by November 1st. The registration fee is $375 for an individual, or $650 if you have 2 business partners or a couple that want to attend the conference. And again, that gets you both days of the conference and all of the printed information materials and all of the very good refreshments that we serve at this conference. One thing kind of unique on this conference as well is we call it happy hour, but basically try to have a big networking opportunity with us as speakers and faculty here at K-State Ag Econ and all the attendees and sponsors. So we try to, as Ashlee was talking about, get that peer-to-peer networking, learning opportunities, informal learning opportunities that just happen at a conference like this.
Robin, Ashlee, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Thank you.
That was K-State Extension farm economist Robin Reid and Director of the Office of Farm and Ranch Transition at K-State, Ashlee Westerhold. As Robin mentioned, you can find more information about the Kansas Landowner Conference by going to AgManager.info/landowner. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. A move away from BMR, brown midrib hybrid varieties, will result in significant changes in seed offerings for 2026. In anticipation of the changes, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk recommends that producers think about how they use corn silage in the diet, select a variety with high digestibility, and harvest the silage at the right time.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning choices when we look at corn silage seed orders for next year. If you've had a conversation with your seed company, you may have noticed that there are some changes maybe in some of the offerings of the hybrids for the 2026 growing year. One of the big changes that we're seeing is a move away from the BMR or the brown midrib versions in many of the hybrid lineups as we look to the future. How is this going to impact your operation? Well, many of you probably have been planting BMR hybrids for much of your corn silage needs on your dairy, and you've been doing that with the idea that it would have higher fiber digestibility. However, as we move into this time when those will no longer be available, what are you going to concentrate on when you look at the selection of the right hybrid for your herd as well as for the land that you will grow it on? Some of the things I would encourage you to consider is
how do you actually use corn silage in your dairy diets? And that's a conversation you need to have with your nutritionist. You know, as we look at the changes in dairy diets over the past 10 years, we see a higher and higher inclusion rate of byproducts in those diets. Part of this is driven by prices and the fact that many of these byproducts are very economical and actually compete very well. They also bring some different nutrients and digestibilities to the diet as well. So depending on how you're using byproducts to meet part of the fiber needs, and especially the non-fiber carbohydrate needs in your dairy diets, may impact how you might want to use corn silage. Now, as we think about corn silage and the fact that you may not be planting a BMR hybrid in the future, what do you need to concentrate on in terms of making sure that that fiber is going to still be digestible? Because it is important that we get good digestibility from that fiber that comes from the corn silage side. So what are some things that you need to consider? Well, one will be your harvest windows. As the corn matures, the digestibility of the fiber goes down. And as we get to black layer and beyond, it will even decrease more. So it'll become more critical that we pay attention to where we're at with the maturity of the corn plant, as well as where we're at with the maturity of the grain. So as we think about the push in recent years to increase the starch content by waiting a little bit longer to harvest that corn silage, we may need to pull back on that just a little bit so that we can increase the chances that we will have digestible fiber from that corn plant, as well as an adequate amount of starch from the grain as well. So if you've been targeting 38% dry matter for the whole plant crop as you put it into the silo, you might want to adjust that down just a little bit, point or two, so that we can have a greater chance of gaining an increase in fiber digestibility. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to carefully consider the choices of corn silage hybrids as they move into the 2026 growing season.
Thanks, Mike. And while we have a moment, in agricultural news, rising input costs and growing demands to improve cattle health are pushing producers to look closely at how they manage bovine respiratory disease. Researchers at Kansas State University's College of Veterinary Medicine recently shared findings from 3 field trials that tested treatment strategies in real-world feedlot settings. David Renter, a professor of epidemiology and director of K-State's Center for Outcomes Research and Epidemiology, says results show no single best option, underscoring the need for case-specific decisions guided by a veterinarian who understands a producer's specific cattle and operation. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.